We've given people a little bit of a grace period, so I think we should get started. Is that all right, Joy?
That's a great idea.
All right.
Did you want to start?
Yeah, I just wanted to say hello and welcome to everybody. I'm Rabbi Jessica Lenza, and I am the Associate Director of Creative Development at B'nai Jeshurun. And I'm honored to be with you here tonight for the second in our three-part series on the poetry of Kabbalat Shabbat with author and poet Joy Ladin. Tonight we'll be looking at some of the Psalms of Kabbalat Shabbat. I did send out those Psalms in an email. I'm going to also put them in the chat. And I'm going to monitor the chat while we're learning from Joy. And then Joy, I'll flag you down if there's something that I feel like, oh, we should, really pay attention to this. Of course, if you want to raise your hand like on Zoom, not like this, I think that would probably get Joy's attention also. All right. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our lovely teacher.
Thank you, Jessica. Great to see you all again. That was really something, that class we had last week. I'd never taught anything like this, and my head was just so full of what we were talking about and what we were doing. Grateful to everybody who participated. This week, I'd like to do something that builds on what we did before. And so something that is similar, but also different. And then I'm hoping, as we did last week, that I'm going to start by presenting some ideas about how to read these texts and try to lead us through a reading that, with in a kind of focused way. And then I'm hoping that we can open it up more as we go, the way that we did last time. It is my fondest wish that we'll actually be able to discuss three texts this week. Did anyone not get the PDFs that Jessica sent out? Nora, you didn't get them? Okay. Well, I'm going to do a screen share. So I'm going to start with Psalm 95. So those of you who got the PDFs, there are two packets, and one of them says Psalm 95 and several other Psalms. That's the packet we're going to focus on this time. The other packet is what we'll talk about next week. And I'm going to start by talking about Psalm 95, which I'm going to put up on the screen. All right, good. And so before I dive into this, I just want to remind us that last week I was encouraging us as we read Psalms. So these are amazing texts. I mean, Yedid Nefesh alone, we could have done 3 classes on that without exhausting it. And I was encouraging you to think about like the simplest and most reductive of questions when reading it. Who is talking in the text? Who are they talking to? And what relationship do we imagine, based on the clues in the text, between the speaker and the addressee, the person who's being addressed by the speaker? What do we think the relationship is? And do we notice that changing at all, or does it seem the same? So often the simplest questions in reading interesting texts are the hardest to focus on, because why do we want to think about who's talking and who they're talking to when what we're reading is blowing our minds, and we've got a million things to say about it that we're associating with it. But one of the my interpretation of the assignment to do the poetry of Kabbalat Shabbat is to try to share some of the skills in reading and thinking about poetry that literary critics have developed, but that also I've just developed as a poet and a workshop leader. And often what happens is if we don't force ourselves to slow down and ask some of the basic questions about the text, it becomes very difficult for us to distinguish between what the text is actually saying and what ideas we're projecting on it. And when you take texts, which for some of us, these texts are tattooed into our brains. Literally, we've been singing and reading these texts every week for years. So defamiliarizing them is not easy. But one way to do that is to ask these kinds of simple questions. I don't know if there are any people who remember Columbo, but you know how Columbo would always be turning away and say, oh, just one more thing. And it would be some, again, simple, almost stupid question, but it would be the key to the whole thing. I often find that happens when reading poetry, because only when we ask ourselves these basic questions can we turn off the assumptions that we bring to the text and start to see them with fresh eyes. Another advantage of this is that, again, when I teach literature to college students, often the problem is that nobody has read the text, right? But here, it's kind of the opposite problem. I think most of us have read these texts more than once, and we bring a bunch of associations to them. So addressing these simple questions about who's talking, who they're talking to, what that relationship is, that's a way of establishing a common ground in very complicated texts that will pull us in all sorts of directions. Not that I don't want to go in all sorts of directions. I just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. And just a quick personal anecdote of this. One of my first acceptances as a poet was living in the Tenderloin in San Francisco in the 80s, and I would write in a closet, literally. We had a one-room apartment, and then there was this closet with a door, and I would go in there. Anyway, it was, very young writer. And so I got very excited when I got this acceptance, and I'd written this poem in the voice of a little girl whose mother worked and would leave her alone in the apartment all day. And I got an acceptance from a really trendy magazine, something that still has almost never happened to me. And I was very excited. And then I read the acceptance letter, and they said, we really love this poem about the relationship between an adult homosexual son and his mother. And I was like, what are you talking about? I mean, I didn't tell them they couldn't publish the poem. I still let them publish the poem, but it was a tremendous lesson to me in how readings that seemed obvious to me, other people coming from different places might have completely different ideas. So I'm hoping these simple questions will give us a common basis from which we can go off in our interesting directions. And this time I want to ask another question, which sounds simple, but which is actually tricky, which is, once we think about who's talking, who are they talking to, and what's the relationship, where do I stand? And I find that a very confusing question when I read Psalms in particular. I love the fact that Psalms often go all over the place. There are some that follow pretty repetitive forms, hallelujah this, hallelujah that. But in a lot of them, I feel like I'm really not sure at any given moment where I stand in relation to what's being said. So this is a real question. And I think if you are a psalm, or if you're a psalm writer, you might want to know where your reader is going to stand in relation to the psalm, right? How are your words striking the people who are not you, who are reading this? Now, I think a lot of these were sung, they were performed. That's a whole different dynamic when it comes to interpretation. But they've come to us as texts, stripped of their original musical and communal ritual settings. And that's the way they've continued to live in our people. So this question of, when we read something, it happens just in the privacy of our own head. It happens inside us. So when we take words in, they change us in certain kinds of ways. And one thing I want us to do is to try to look at what happens inside us as we're slowly making our way through these texts and asking ourselves where we stand. And honestly, it is not, I don't want to do this because I know, I want to do this because I don't know. I really am always wondering about this. And it occurs to me that it's possible that wondering that is key to the Psalms having the kind of effect that that they would like to have on us, and certainly in terms of preparing us for Shabbat. If they're really preparing us for Shabbat, they must want to affect us. They must want to enter into us and change us in some way. And the primary way that language does that is by the way we process it, by the way we turn it from marks on a page into meaning. So we're going to slow that down with these dumb questions and see what happens inside us as we do that and what new things might be suggested by it. And I wanted to start by showing you what I mean with Psalm 95. I want to take the first three stanzas. Unfortunately for me, the third stanza continues on to the next page, but
Joy, before you do that, we had a question in the chat from Kathy who wanted to know more about like when you're writing poetry yourself, like should you consider the speaker and who the audience is? Like, what's your opinion on that?
That is a great question, Kathy. And I think it depends on the stage of your writing process. I mean, people write in a lot of different ways. Some people have projects and they know, like, I'm going to write from the perspective of the first indigenous peoples who saw Christopher Columbus's ship. So you're using your brain to think about a lot of these questions already. But if you're like me, most of the writing you do, you just start writing. You have no clue what's going on. And it's only after I've written a bunch of stuff, most of which will be drivel. On a good day, when I go back to it, it's not all drivel, but a lot of it I know is going to be drivel. But that's when I start asking myself questions. And often the words on the page, they sound strange to me. It sounds like a strange voice. And that interests me because I know the way I talk, I know the way I think. But when through poetry, a new voice, a new perspective starts emerging, I get very intrigued and interested. So at that point in revision, when you're developing some stuff, those are good times to ask those questions. I would say the question of who you're writing to, some people don't ever really feel like that's relevant for them, right? They have an audience in their head, but it's not a real audience. I remember when I was a kid, I started writing poetry when I was in grade school. And I imagined that my audience was basically everyone. I didn't know anything about poetry. So I thought each thing that I wrote that I considered a poem, literature had grown substantially. And I just imagined everybody being interested in it. Needless to say, that was not a real audience, but it sure was inspiring for me. So as a writer, the rule is you want to imagine yourself writing to an audience that inspires you to be able to write more, to do your best work. And that can be a completely private thing. You can write to dead people, you can write to imaginary people. You can write to the Jewish people, whether or not the Jewish people are reading you, you can write to them. But what you don't want to do is imagine an audience that makes it harder for you to write. You know, that second grade teacher who made you feel like crap when you showed her the thing you don't want to write to that, anybody who's like that. So, and then when you're sending work out, you definitely want to keep in mind, okay, a lot of people who are not me are going to look at this. How do I want it to present itself to them? Do they need any help in order to get into reading it the way I need to? But to me, that's a pretty late stage. Thank you. I kind of wish we knew how these texts emerged. I'm sure that it was a completely different process than anything like I just said, but I am curious about it. So when I start reading this, let us go and sing to one another. I immediately Columbo myself. I'm like, who is us? And who's speaking to us? And I don't know. So is the speaker somebody who's in a group of people, like you're partying, and then somebody says, you know what? Let's all get up and go sing to Adonai now. I think that would be fun. And let's trumpet praise to our protector. Um, so there's a group of people, but they're not necessarily thinking of doing this. They're not thinking of going to sing to Adonai. And one person in the group says, let's do that. And the rest of the group, well, honestly, we don't know what the rest of the group says. That seems like one way of reading this. Another is that there's a singular speaker, but they're the leader. They know that they're speaking for the group because they're the leader. Like when I say, all right, let's look at Psalm 95. I'm not imagining being shouted down or disagreed with. I'm hoping people will at least pretend to look at Psalm 95 with me, because that's the role that I have. So that could be this. This could be in the voice of a leader, but again, speaking to a group, but a group that acknowledges that we should listen to them and do what they say. Or it could be a whole bunch of people speaking together, right? Like the way in the Torah portion we recently read, like the people start shouting, let's make a God who will go before us, right? There's no leader that the Torah singles out there. It's just like everybody all at once has this idea and they all do it together. So those are three pretty different ideas of who's talking and who they're talking to and what the relationship is between them. In the everybody talking at once thing, there's really like it's the group talking to themselves and there's complete agreement. If it's just somebody in a group but who's not the leader, who knows whether they're going to be, this might be a persuasive thing. It's like, guys, really, it's going to be so fun to go sing to Adonai. Let's all go do that right now. That'll be a blast, and the leader position is somewhere in between there. And those three possibilities then make me think, well, where am I also in relation to the us? Because one of the things about written texts, even one like this text, written literally millennia ago, it sounds like it's happening right now, right? Let's go sing. This is, I mean, it's like the present and the verge of the future. It's eternally fresh. And yet, I'm not sure that I'm part of the us. I know I'm not the speaker, but I don't know if I'm supposed to identify with the us. If I'm supposed to feel like this voice is talking to me, number one, like, I'm your leader, Joy. You're part of my group. Listen to what I'm saying. Or if this is an invitation, right? It's like, there's an us. We're all going to do this fun singing to Adonai thing. Do you want to join us? Do you want to jump in here? Right? So being invited to identify is what I would call that in technical terms. The speaker is inviting me to identify with the addressee, not assuming that I am the addressee. There are other places in Psalms where I think there is an assumption that the people who are reading it, the Jews who are reading it, will agree with what's being said, but I'm not positive that that's going on here because of the time frame. And there's the third possibility is I'm not part of this us at all. And this is kind of I feel like I'm always on the verge of this with Psalms like this, of being trapped in my individuality, my modernity, my skepticism. Like, really? Let's go sing Adonai, trumpet praise to our protector? A little suspicious there. Do you mean the same thing by Adonai as I mean? What does protector mean? What is even trumpeting praise? Have I ever trumpeted praise? I don't think I'm a great singer in show. I'm loud. but I've never thought of myself as trumpeting praise. And I'm not sure I'd think it was a compliment if somebody said, Joy, wow, you're really trumpeting during this song. That feels like, yeah, might sting a little bit. So those are the relations that I can identify here, my possible relations to what's being said here and the person who's speaking. And it feels kind of indeterminate for me. Or rather, I would say it feels like a choose your own adventure. Like I get to choose whether I'm going to identify with the us and just say, yeah, heck yeah. In fact, I'm already singing. I'm singing Lachuna Ranana, so I'm already singing, right? Or whether I'm in one of these other relations. When I'm not sure if I'm plunging into the us, or even if I am part of the us, I still want to know who are we praising? Who do you think we're praising? Who am I praising by going along with you? This is probably one reason that I rarely go to demonstrations. Everybody starts chanting together and it feels great, but I just feel like, I don't know, these aren't my words. Do I really agree with this? And now we're talking about something that really matters to me. We're talking about God. So the relation to God that we're engaging in. So singing to God is different than singing about God. And it's different than singing for God. Those are all subtly different things. And does singing to God mean God, we know God is listening in this situation? That'd be kind of nice. All we have to do is go with the us, and we're singing directly to God. And then we get to our protector thing, and I'm like, I wanted to identify with this, but I'm not sure I relate to God as our protector. Now it sounds like the us has a history, right? Because you wouldn't refer to God. You could sing to God and ask for protection, or you could name God as protector. But this sounds like we have history with this God. And our history tells us that God's a protector. So let's praise the one that we as a group know protects us. I think that this may be particularly difficult in a post-Holocaust time, but frankly, there have been a lot of moments in Jewish history where the whole protector thing, you might or might not go with it. So one of the things that I need to do if I want to identify with this is ask myself, well, what's the conception of God and the relationship to God that the psalm is presuming, the speaker is presuming? And how do I feel about that? Filled with thanks, let us greet God, raising our voices in song. I'm like, okay, yeah, I can do that, or I can aspire to it. Do I feel thankful right now? Do I need to wait to feel thanks before greeting God? I do like the idea that we can greet God, though, that God is that close. This is like, let's go sing to Adonai. All we have to do is walk down the block. Remember those, teenage parties that would suddenly get up and move? Let's go to Joe's house. Yeah, we'll just start shouting on Joe's lawn and he'll come out, right? This is like, let's go and sing to God. God's waiting there for us. And we can just say, hi, God, let's join the party. The party's all about you. You're the guest of honor. We've brought the party to you. So I like that idea, but I don't know if I've ever experienced that intimacy. And so again, I'm thinking, well, is this inviting me to do something? Because I don't know if I can do it. Or maybe it's modeling something for me. Maybe it's trying to instruct me that this is a possible relation to God. Maybe it's not something I've ever experienced, but here it is. Here's what it looks and sounds like. And that's giving me the option of identifying or not. And then we get to the second stanza. And it says, great is Adonai, and I am confused. I have Columboed myself into the abyss. Joyce?
Hi, so I have a question about this because as I was reading, first of all, we say, since we're seeing that we start with this psalm every Friday night. But the English goes right into great is Adonai, but the Hebrew actually says ki el gadol. Ki is like the rationale, the reason.
Yes.
And it's not, so it's almost like the first few sentences are saying, we should do this, and this is why we should do this. Kind of giving the reason or the rationale, the proof text, whatever, of why we should do that. And I kind of feel that the rest of it, as I read up until Yabeshet Yadav Yatsaru, I'm trying to see where that is on the translation, for God, God's work, okay? Then it says again, Bo nishtachad b'nichra'a. It's almost repeating the first set of words of L'chu Niranana.
Mm.
I think
Yes.
it loses something somehow in the translation, but I'm also then thinking that whatever rabbi we get on Friday night that starts, we always, although we start with Yedid Nefesh, this is really where Kabbalat Shabbat, part starts.
Mm. Yeah, well, as we were noticing last time together, Yedid Nefesh is really weirdly personal. Like it's both weird and personal. And this is where the communal thing starts. And Shir Hashirim is it's a story, I mean, it's action that's happening between characters. So this is where the service and the question of who's us and what are we doing and what's our relation to God, this is where it kicks in and gets serious. Part of the way I'm hearing your comment, Joyce, is saying that key turn means that you read this as an effort at persuasion.
Well, that's what the word means. Why, when you say why, why should I do it? Ki means because. That's the translation for the word.
Yes, but there's because in a causal sense, and then there's like the way it's sometimes translated for great is Adonai, which is more like, now that we're raising our voice in song, we're filled with thanks. We're thinking about all the things that we're thankful for. But that's different than, gang, I really think we should do this because God is great and so forth and so on and all these other reasons, which I think is I think that both of those readings are possible. That really gets to who's talking and what's their relationship to who they're talking to. And it really, I think, changes the psalm. And if you take it as an argumentative thing, as opposed to like, we're all filled with thanks and here's a bunch of things we're filled with thanks for, we take it as I think we should do this and here are the reasons why, then it puts you in the position of being able to evaluate the reasons, whether you think this is right or not. Marjorie?
Did lower my hand, but I'll just say quickly, just in general, the little bit that I know about the Torah, and I don't know if the Tehillim, if this is true as well, and you can chime in. I know that the Torah was originally oral and it was only written down later, and that the vowels came later. And so therefore the pronouns, the particularity of the gendering may have come later. And so if you have something that's oral and hasn't been written down for a while, all these things, this close reading of voices is maybe, maybe it just depends on who actually the scribes that wrote it down. I know we're not in this particular poem, it's third person talking about Adonai.
You're completely right. There are a lot of complicated textual issues and transmission issues that go with the Torah text. They're really old. It's like the oldest game of telephone in the world. And, stuff happens when something's copied over tens of thousands of times by different people. However, in order to practice this kind of reading, we have to put those questions on hold. And that's actually one of the reasons I'm not, I mean, I'm delighted when Joyce or other people go into the Hebrew, but I'm staying focused on, I like a lot of Ed's translations. This is not one that I'm enamored of, but I'm sticking with it because it's only by simplifying the text and saying, well, these are the words that we have, and we're trying to make sense of them, can we sort of practice this way of reading, asking these questions and observing what goes on inside us as we try to make meaning of it. I don't know Hebrew well enough to go through this process in the Hebrew.
In this one, I was just going to say, just to conclude, it's pretty much, us, we, plural, and God, who is in this translation, God is not named with a gender. Well, maybe it is assigned, but basically it's we and God. So it's a simpler kind of idea in it. So that's neither here nor there, but I'm
it's
just
a little bit more, Marjorie, it's a little bit more complicated. This is somebody speaking for a group, somebody speaking in the first person plural. That's the English professory language for that. But it's hard to tell if this is, as I said, if it's a whole group agreeing on this and saying this in unison, if it's somebody, Joyce just gave a good argument for reading it as somebody trying to persuade other people to do this and have this relation to God. So that's, I want to hear what Sam has to say now, Marjorie. Thank you. Sam?
There have been 3, maybe even 4 ideas as to who is the speaker. And since we, in particular, especially since we'll probably never know for certain, what is, for me, I prefer to hold all of those ideas in my head at one time, which I find to be a much more enriching and spiritual experience. So it is, yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, these texts are creating potentials. And one of the reasons that I like to go through this kind of catalog is you don't know what the possibilities are until you know what the possibilities are. Because in order to read a text, like I can't get, as you can see, I am still not solidly in stanza 2 here. If I'm in Friday night services, even if I'm reading this to myself in English, I can't say, well, who's talking now and who are they talking to and what's it about, right? It's only if I do that outside of the actual prayer process that I can, and preferably with a bunch of other people. Like I need Joyce's and Marjorie's and Yu's in order to help me recognize what all the possibilities are. And then hopefully I can bring that back into the experience of reading. That's exactly right. So some things are alternatives. Sometimes it's a choose your own adventure, because I'm envious of your mind. If you can actually read this as 4 different texts at once, that is, I am in awe. Emily Dickinson, I'm a Dickinson person, and she sometimes makes me feel like I should be able to read that way, but my brain starts melting. But that is ideal. But I think that figuring out what the possibilities are enables us to make choices as we read at any given time about how many possibilities we want to think about and which ones we want to actually pursue. Rabbi?
Yeah, so I'm not a poet, but I'm a performer, and I often do dramatic translations of sacred texts. And so when you're talking about like who's the speaker, I'm also thinking about, well, what is that speaker's emotional life, right? Like how different it would be for somebody to say this after some kind of triumph as opposed to some kind of tragedy, right? Like how does that totally color this text differently? And I don't know why, but it kind of popped into my mind like that. The scene in Bereshit in Genesis when Abraham is taking Isaac to sacrifice him, and like thinking about the two of them walking on together. Like, what would it mean if Abraham was saying, let's go, let's do, we're going to show our praise to God because God is great. Like, how different that is than, like, you know, people worshiping at the temple as part of their, you know, regular kind of experience.
Yeah, that's a chilling reading. I mean, that's right. Think about the cynicism one might have if you were a father about to sacrifice a son and saying, on the way, let's sing praise to our protector who's told me to kill you. I will never read this the same way again, Jessica. But even in the big temple, you know, Beit Hamikdash, or our local synagogues, we all come in from different places, from different experiences when we read these words, and it changes things a lot. You know, if you've just suffered a tragedy and you read, let us trumpet praise to our protector, that is going to land differently with you than if you've actually just avoided being hit by a car and you're like, wow, absolutely. Joyce was suggesting that all of this is a speaker trying to get us to do this. And that is really in the spirit of Kabbalat Shabbat, right? Like trying to get us in the head of going out to greet God, not waiting for God to come to us. Let's go meet God. You know, it's like next week when we're talking about Lecha Dodi, you know, let's go out and greet the Sabbath and meet the Sabbath. But then with that key, El Gadol Adonai, for or because God is great, then it's like things were going great in the first stanza, but now nobody's gotten up and going. Like nobody else is putting on their coats at the party to go with me here. So I'm going to have to give you some reasons why we might do this. And whether or not you read it that way, or if you read it as, to me, this sounds different enough. Like there is no first person plural here, the way there is in the first stanza, which could mean that this is a different speaker. Or it could mean that it's the same speaker who's continuing an argument, as Joyce was saying. But in any case, I'm noticing that what's being said about God strikes me as pretty different than what's being said about God in the first stanza. Here in the English, God's a protector, someone that we're thankful for, that we can go greet. You know, God's right there, accessible to us, and we're enjoying some kind of intimate experience of God's goodness, protection, other things we're grateful for, and that's why we're singing. But now we're talking about God's greatness, and God is a greater sovereign than all other deities. And that to me is not the voice of let's think about our intimate experience of God and the things that we're grateful for and the protection that we've enjoyed. All of a sudden, the speaker is inviting me to see God and all of the other deities, which is a little, you know, maybe a little not kosher, but you can't argue that God is greater than all other deities without also thinking about all of their deities. It's like the don't think of an elephant problem. When I say don't think of an elephant, everybody thinks of an elephant, right? So if God is the greatest of gods, then you have to also think about the other gods. And now the perspective that I'm being invited to is, you know, at first I thought my problem as a reader was, well, do I join in the us? Do I see myself as us? Do I get persuaded to go along with us? Do I like what us is doing here in relation to God? Now I've got vertigo because I am somewhere from a perspective when I can see God and the other deities, and I can see that God is greater than the other deities. That which I'm, as you can see, I'm imagining that as going up and out, and you know, one of these, like when the camera pulls away and suddenly you're looking down on planet Earth and then the solar system and the, right? It's like this dizzying shift. And then there's another dizzying shift. God's hands formed the earth's deep. Now I'm watching the process of creation. And I'm watching the process of creation in a part of creation that I don't actually get to see in Earth's deep. I'm watching God's hands shaping the depths of the earth, the core, what's underneath the surface of it. And then mountain crests too are God's work. Now it seems like we've shifted fast forwarded in time. Creation is over. There are mountains. But I'm being reminded that the tops of those mountains, just like the deeps, were also God's work. And now I'm looking at the sea, and now I'm looking at dry land, and again, being fashioned by God's hands. So I've got anthropomorphism of God. I have the speaker both showing me God in the act of creating the earth, and then fast forwarding through time and saying, see, you saw this happen. So now when you see the earth, the sea, the mountains, you should know that these were all formed by God's hands. Don't just see earth, sea, and mountains, see them being shaped by God. It's a whirlwind tour, and it doesn't seem to have much to do with protection or being thankful for God. And it certainly doesn't feel like God is around the corner and we can just go greet God or sing directly to God. And then in the third stanza, there is another shift. We go back to, and this is what Joyce was pointing out in the Hebrew, but it's, thank God, even in the English this time. Come then, let us. Now we're back to the collective us. And again, it's hard to tell if this is somebody trying to persuade or if this is, we've all reflected together in, ecstatic unison on God's greatness. Now, as the logical outgrowth of that, let's all bow and kneel. I'm the leader. I know that this is what we want to do now. Let's bend our knees in the presence of Adonai who formed us. The mountains, we saw the mountains formed. We saw the depths of the earth formed. We were formed also. This is a hierarchical relation to God that I'm being invited into. And the high, which I'm like, I'm into personally. This is not projecting my problems onto you, my spiritual problems, but I don't mind thinking about how great God is. And I'm not crazy about thinking about how small I am and how bowy I should get in relation to God. It's a little bit of a problem in my spiritual life. And the psalm really pushes me, because then the next lines are, for Adonai is our God, and we're God's flock, sheep in God's caring hands. So now this voice is offering me an intimate relationship with God again. But in order to experience that, I have to be willing to accept the sheep to shepherd relation. And if any of you are familiar with what happens to sheep that are cared for by shepherds, you know that can be like a complicated relationship. It's intimate. You are definitely cared for by your shepherd, but the shepherd may have ulterior motives here. But in this case, we're just being, which is right, like that is a relationship to God. Absolute acceptance, submission to God's will in return for recognizing the intimate care that we have. That is a classic and an exalted relation to God. It's not anything that this psalm has invited me into before, though. And it feels like a come down to go from watching God be higher than other gods to being a sheep in God's flock. This feels like some pretty complicated spiritual yoga for me. In order for me to understand these different relations and I have to try them on, figure out what they are, and then try them on for size. And in order to do that, in order to say, well, how much do I identify with these different ideas of God? I actually kind of have to go through each of them and feel how they are. And as I do, I feel like I'm stretching inside. I don't get, at the beginning of the psalm, when it says, let us go and sing to Adonai, I thought I knew what that meant. I thought I knew at least what I meant by Adonai. But now I've been brought through a bunch of other things, bunch of ways of conceptualizing what that means and what my relationship to God means. And I feel challenged and stretched. Okay, so finally, I'm going to stop talking here. And Sam, actually, I wanted to start by going back to you because you suggested really as a great idea of like just holding all of the possibilities in your mind at once. And I was wondering if you're, Adria is, may have a response to this first, but are you able to do that with all of these different ideas about God? Like, can they all be held at once, or do you experience them successively the way that I do?
I think at once, although at once is, I mean, they seem to float all in there at the same time, but I have a tendency to, there's some of them that I reject, and so the ones that are left tend to be there. And I I'm very fascinated, and you'll forgive me because you may have raised this issue in the first class, which I wasn't able to come to. But setting aside completely the idea of what kind of God needs us to praise God, but what is it in us that we see a need to praise, right? What is it, and I, and ideally I'd want to say, well, it's because we believe that it will bring out the best in us. We believe that it will connect us with the larger, that it will be transformational to somehow do this, and but these are ancient words that speak to a God, that is very literal, right? And I think, and if we don't try and hold those different ideas in our head, then at least for me, we're robbed of the experience. Right?
Thank you. So this question about praise, I think, goes along with Joyce's reading of this as somebody trying to persuade us into this praise relationship, suggests that it was not something to take for granted. That's what that ki el gadol, if you read that, is, because it's like, I know that I'm going to have to lay out my reasons. You're not going to just bow and kneel and bend your knees in the presence of God. You need to be reminded of all of the reasons why one might praise God, all of the ways that one might experience God.
Well, it's one reading. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Forgive me. No, I'm sorry. Yes.
You're adopting something that I think is something I do also, which is, I would say, a critical distance. I'm not throwing myself into the us in this poem. I'm like, yeah, I like that one. I'm not sure I like that one. Like, instead of identifying with the us the way the speaker clearly would like me to do, or maybe the whole group would like me to do, I do feel like I'm standing from the outside, and sometimes I feel like I'm brought closer. Sometimes I feel like I don't identify with that and I don't want to. Adria and Joyce.
I'm actually, I was going to start to read the next verse. If only you would listen today to God's voice. So if I'm ahead of you, maybe Joyce should speak and then me.
Actually, we're going to go there next, but if Joyce, you said Joyce, not Joy. Yeah, right. Okay, Joyce.
Hi. So, I never connected this, but it strikes me that we say some of the same words on Yom Kippur when we're singing Ki Anu Amecha. We're your flock, we're your sons, you're our father, you're our parent. However, there are lots of, in terms of the relationship, it's almost the opposite. And the other on Yom Kippur, we're asking God to forgive us because of these reasons.
That's right. In that piyut and some other piyutim, the idea is that we are speaking collectively. We all have a collective interest in reminding God that we have this powerful bond because we want something out of God. And that's a very different position than, Joyce, your reading of this as somebody trying to rouse people to praise and enter into this really, I would say, an ecstatic religious state, which is, not most people's default. And I think the Kabbalat Shabbat service presumes that people kind of need to get revved up to have a communal spiritual experience. And one way of reading this poem is, it is trying to activate our praise, convince us to praise, remind us of our desire to praise, remind us of our reasons to praise, persuade us to enter into the sort of humility and submission required to stand in that relation to God. Adria's going to kick us off with that last stanza, but Florence, did you want to talk about the first three stanzas or the?
Yeah, I did. I was really surprised when you said you felt judged, because I had a really different response to these first stanzas, which was, I felt that it was an invitation, and then whoever the speaker is goes into this expansive description of God that is, I agree, does this sort of dizzying thing, but it reminded me, it has words in it that reminded me of the 6 days of creation. And then the speaker had me at Lifnei Adonai Osenu, before the God that made us. This God who did all of these fantastic, almost unimaginable things is also the God that is the source that we are from. And so I felt like this was more like, well, you had me at hello. I felt like, okay, I now, not only do I hear where you are coming from, I am there with you and I accept this invitation. So it didn't make me feel judged. It made me feel like I'm included.
That is a beautiful reading. And as you were explaining, it was a lovely way to bring us through. And it's a great example of, in a choose your own adventure text, by which I mean a text that is open to multiple interpretive possibilities. One of it is really good to hear each person's adventure, right? Because that, having heard Florence's adventure, that gives me a way of reading this that I might not have had before. And now I'm seeing the first stanza starts out not only with this, like, us, let us do this kind of thing, but the idea is of a very intimate relation to God. Then there's this dizzying cosmological tour. Imagine David Attenborough narrating a documentary with these images or something. And then it comes back and it's the us again, but it's also that God who formed us, God who made us, has some of the intimacy of our protector. Let us greet God. Maybe we can't feel God making us now, but now that we've learned to look at the mountains tops and see God's fingerprints on them, we can look at ourselves and see God's fingerprints on us. So it brings it back to that relationship, but it infuses that intimacy with the grandeur, the cosmological grandeur. Thank you, Florence. We are finally ready for that last stanza. Kick us off.
So I've been absorbing your Joy, your way of looking at pronouns and pronouns. Let me stop there. And so this is the verse where I'm asking the Hebrew speakers, because there's so much transition in this verse.
Oh, yeah.
So if only you, and my first question, is that a you plural or a you singular for the Hebrew people? If only you would listen today to God's voice. And I think the word for voice is bikolo, and that's like his voice. So we really are talking about a third person male singular there, right? Right. So if only you would listen to God's voice and not become hard-hearted like the people. And so it's like this transition, because who's saying the people are hard-hearted? And then it gets to be kind of God starts talking when your ancestor tried capital me. Now, so my question is for the Hebrew speakers, like when does it really shift to God talking? And does God really say your ancestors? I'm just trying to get some of the literalness in the Hebrew. And just to say, so that's my question. I would really love that. And just to say, as an aside, I'm appreciative of how some of you, I think most of you, are really using these texts in this class to get closer in a devotional sense. Me, I don't do the English. I chant Hebrew, and that is my path. That's just my path. So, and I'm like a Zoom just joined you all. So, you know, I've come from a different place. But anyhow, the questions are for the Hebrew. When grammatically, how does it shift?
Well, the English actually tracks that here. It is plural. It weirdly refers to God with a pronoun at the beginning. If only you, plural, would, listen today to God's voice. And then we realize, oh, it's God talking, but not until toward the end of that sentence. All of a sudden, talk about a shift in speaker. It's like at the beginning, the obvious way to read this is, Joyce's persuasive speaker, right? The theory that there's one speaker trying to persuade the us to enter into this relationship with God, this praise and submission relationship to God. The logical thing would be to say, clearly that is not going well, right? That the speaker has tried everything, and pulled out all the stops, usually inviting them to watch the depths of the earth being formed. That always gets them. But this is a tough crowd. They are not going with me here. So I'm going to have to turn on the fire and brimstone here, right? If only you'd listen to God's voice today, right now. It's happening right now. And don't be hard-hearted like the ancestors that you've read about, right? God was also right there with them. And, in Bamidbar, and they were nothing but tsuras to God. Don't be like those people. God is right here with us now. I've just shown you that. Don't harden your heart. Listen to God's voice. Enter into this relationship to God. That's a logical reading until it says, when your ancestors tried me, and that's what it says in the Hebrew, when your ancestors tried or, tested me. And then it's like, what happened? God seems to have preempted the program already in progress here. Sonia, what do you make of this?
Yes, I found this stanza, I guess we would call it, so confusing, so different from all that we read before, that comes before, and it feels, like a strange, sort of threatening, kind of rageful shift. And I heard from the get-go as being from God and God's voice. Kind of like, I just realized as I was thinking before speaking, when a mother might say, you didn't listen to mommy. The mother is talking and saying, you didn't listen to mommy. Not that my mother ever spoke to me that way, but if only you would listen today to God's voice, to my God's voice, and not become hard-hearted. When your ancestors tried me and tested me, almost sounding guilt-producing, like, again, a Jewish mother who's talking about, which again was, I know we're talking about our readings as projections, they have to be, but just so you know, my mother, I don't remember experiencing her this way at all. In fact, well, that's a whole other story, but for 40 years, I was troubled by that generation. And I said, so it's really imploring, it's beseeching, it's saying, at the end, these are people whose hearts have gone astray. They do not know my way. So in anger, I swore they would not enter my rest. And then it ends. And I'm thinking, wait, what? I mean, how does this relate at all to the beginning of this poem or this prayer? Where did it come from? Who wrote it? Is it actually God's voice that comes in and is like presenting something entirely different for us to be contemplating, and not getting too full of our praise, and not getting, not forgetting that we really have to be little sheep and do what God is telling, so maybe there's the connection. And I agree with you about the joy, about that place of being the sheep that was not comfortable either. So I moved in this poem from being able to go with it, really to feel, not even to think about who am I, who were they, let us just be together here at Shabbat, joyfully praising God. That's just the way I like to enter Friday night service. But then again, I think I've said what I need to. Thank you.
There's a real shift here, and it's a rupture, and it's ambiguous who's talking at first, but it's not nice. It's not like we're all sheep in God's care. We're not, something has happened to that relationship that we seem to be all getting along so well. The us is exactly where we want it, and then something seems to have gone terribly wrong. And then there's no way that I can read this where it doesn't seem like God also gets lost, like an elderly person. And speaking of that time when your ancestors tried me, by the way, they were really a mess. Those people were, I'm not even thinking about you and what you're going to do now. I'm just thinking they would kvetch. They were like, so I was just so furious with them. And I've forgotten what we were saying, so I'm just going to stop and we'll move on now. It's very concerning. And then this is the God that we're supposed to cuddle up with, to be sheep and be held by. It's disturbing. Marjorie, you've been very patient, and Kathy, and then Sam.
I'll just say, as much as I love grammar consistency, having made my living as a copy editor in modern times, contemporary today, for many, many years, I'm just imagining, and it's nervy of me to imagine back that time ago, that people, because the words weren't written down, people were not as cognizant of the shift, and B, they didn't need to care. And I could imagine a figure standing up and saying, hey, you guys, a dramatic actor saying, care about God, care. And then all of a sudden the shape shifts and it's a persona of God. It's a presence of God, or someone impersonating God, or it's, or a very simple, if that's too complex to imagine, let's just say it's just like when you're trying to copy edit a TV script and you get pushback from the higher ups and they say, it's conversational, Marjorie, just let them do what they want to do.
But you know what, Marjorie, that is actually here, I'm with you. They are in this stanza, I have to just let them do what they want to do. Because I don't know what the heck is going on. I just have to stand back and, I feel a little bit abused. And then I'm just like, what is wrong with God? But I do want to, but I want to encourage you. I want to ask you in this class, because we can always do that with any text, certainly with ancient texts. We can always say, well, you know what? I don't think that mattered that much what they were saying. Although, people have been thinking and writing about this for a long time. So it means something to some people, but these texts are inviting us, and their deployment in Kabbalat Shabbat is inviting us to respond personally to them and to take them seriously. Now, there's some places like here, I don't know how to do that. So I feel like kicked out of it. But
I'm not blowing them off. I'm not saying, oh, sorry, I interrupted. I'm not saying grammar doesn't matter and they
no, I'm not saying that you are. I'm just saying something else that I feel like you, and this is not a bad thing. This is totally a generative way to think about Torah texts, but you're looking at them from like a 3,000-year perspective. And I'm just inviting people to try identifying with them, to take them as though this is a yoga class. And your teacher is saying, now assume the position of being a sheep in God's caring hand. Everybody get into sheep position. Now assume the position of, being chastised for being, hard-hearted. Clearly you've just screwed up. You're not, so in other words, try to put yourself in the positions.
I'm saying that this is how people experience the spiritual quest. Sometimes it's voices in the head saying, come on, pay attention. And sometimes it's the presence of God saying, hey, I'm right next to you. Hey, it's me there. It's me who was with you right at Sinai. Come on. I've been putting up with this. So that's how God is. God is not a figure. God is an experience. And sometimes it's a coach. And sometimes God is, has a long memory, a long tail.
Thank you. That is a really awesome way. That reminds me of the Gestalt thing, a way to interpret dreams. You're everybody in your dream. But thinking of this as a bunch of different voices of spiritual experience within us, and also thinking of God as inhabiting these multiple voice positions. Those are two, I think, very powerful models of reading. Thank you. You zeroed right in there for me. Kathy, and then Sam.
I think what you were just discussing kind of shifted my thinking, because it's, if we do take a historical perspective, then this last stanza seems very harsh. God condemned a whole generation, and there were no exceptions. And he withheld their comfort and connection, whatever you want to think about it. And what about my generation? Is, how do we measure up? And I don't know, there is such a spiritual quest now, even among Jews. I mean, I think there always has been, but now we're talking about it more in spiritual terms, I think, which is my attraction to Judaism. But I think taking a deep historical perspective can be more troubling than it needs to be, and we are God,
I feel all the same thing. I feel anger, and God feels anger. And so, you know, we share all those things. And so, you know, yeah, I mean, it makes me feel like, just be in the moment, you know, because this is a vision of God in the moment. Doesn't have to be God from 2,000 years ago. It's God in this moment, and me and you and whoever's looking at it.
Based on what you said, there was something that really stuck out to me. Like, we're all ready to relax into the hot tub of, you know, this intimate relationship with God at the end of stanza 3. And this is suddenly like God or somebody saying, think about how this generation, you right now, where do you really stand in relation to God's voice? Are you actually hearing God's voice right now? And where do you stand in relation to that generation that had God, you know, living in their midst? You know, that was another time when I tried to get up close and personal with you guys, and that didn't go so well. So it's interesting that at this moment when we're being invited to dissolve into this loving, submissive relationship, suddenly we're being challenged to take a critical distance, a critical look at ourselves. And of course, as the first, you know, the real beginning of Kabbalat Shabbat, the last word is accurately translated as, you know, my rest, right? So this psalm is saying that what's at stake here, you need to be asking yourself where you stand in relation to, if Marjorie is right, this divine voice that's speaking within you, or a divine voice that's speaking outside you. You need to really check yourself, or you may not be able to enter into my rest. You don't just get to fall into this by singing praise and stuff like that. You need to look carefully at yourself and see if you're actually right now in active relation to the God that is right here with you. Sam?
So again, to some degree, if I set aside what I don't want to accept, you know, then I come close to, Marjorie touched on another some, but I think this, you know, the Heschel idea of God in search of man, that it's possible to understand the first part of the psalm as we're coming to you. We want to come to you. And the last part is not as in anger, but in desperation. Come to me, I'm alone. Look what happened before. Come to me. Mm-hmm. And then there's a wholeness to the psalm in that way. Mm-hmm. I hope I haven't stretched too much.
No. And I think that there is a real yearning of that, you know, that desire to be listened to be known, to be responded to. One of the things about God's anger, and this is something I feel like Christian appropriation of the biblical texts erased the emotional complexity of God's anger. You know, Sonia, with the mother reading here, think about how emotionally complex a relationship with a mother is. You know, when my mother was angry with me, she was angry with me, but it was also always about her own vulnerability and limits, right? Sometimes she was angry with me because I was doing something dangerous and she couldn't protect me because I was too big. Like, I had to protect myself. She was furious that I wasn't doing that. That was all she could do. There's a vulnerability that goes along with that. Like, we get angry at people that we're emotionally exposed to. We get angry in relationships that we're invested in. You know, God's like, are you going to leave me hanging? And the weird temporal shift here is it kind of emphasizes the today, which again is an accurate translation of Yom, right? Think about what's in biblical times. Well, that you even when this was written, I think that that was distant. These were distant, those were distant stories. But we're telling those stories because of what's happening right now, Hayom. And I think that that's what you're drawing attention to, Sam, that there's this, you can see the psalm as a whole, sort of. I still get lost in the sauce there by the end of that last stanza. But you're right, that there's kind of a symmetry to the movement toward God from human beings, and then God's desire to be heard. The mismatch feels like, doesn't whoever is speaking in the last stanza, and certainly God, where were they for the first three stanzas? You know, is this a rejection of everything that we were doing, everything that was being, did we do it wrong? I mean, should we read this as like, don't think this, that, and the other thing about God. Just listen to God's voice right now. Don't be thinking about cosmology. Don't be thinking about creation. But that doesn't go along with anything. That doesn't make sense to me. So that's the thing that I'm struggling with. Has anybody not spoken yet who has any has chosen another adventure than the one that has landed me in this theological pickle? One of the things is that, and here I would, and echoing Marjorie and some of I don't think in poems that stay interesting for a long time, and I will never write a poem that will stay interesting as long as the psalm has stayed interesting, but in poems that stay interesting for a long time, they raise questions that can't be resolved. It's by making readers wonder that we get involved with them. You know, if you're an academic, you can get interested in anything, right? You say, oh, look at these Sumerian text records. Wow, fascinating, right? But if you're not an academic, if it's a poem or something, as readers, we want to be involved in it. And it's hard to be involved in something where we feel like we get it all. When I was teaching at Orthodox Jewish women during college, one of the worst classes I ever taught was, I thought, a brilliant idea. We'll bring together the great biblical prophets, not only the good stuff, you know, late Isaiah and Jeremiah, you know, the really good stuff, and contemporary American poets who also were inspired by them and who adopt a prophetic mode. And frankly, I was more interested in the biblical prophets. I thought they were better writers. But my students, they didn't want to talk about the biblical prophets at all. And I'm like, how can you not be interested in this? And they said, look, we learned when we were kids, they taught us the prophets are always saying one of three things. And that's boring. We know what they're saying. We don't want to think about it anymore. We don't want to listen to it anymore. So I think having some irresolvable mysteries, some choices that we can make, but we'll make them a little differently each time. That's a feature, not a bug, of texts that have spiritual staying power. But I am boggled by the decision to put this poem with this ending at the beginning of Kabbalat Shabbat. I feel like it leaves me in a position. It leaves me in a relation to God that feels a little estranged. And maybe that is the reason. Thinking about Yedid Nefesh and that longing for a God who seems distant, maybe it is important for Kabbalat Shabbat to long for God, to not just take for granted the relationship with God and the praise of God and how lovely everything is, maybe we do need to be reminded that this is a real live relationship. It's happening right now. And like our relationship with our occasionally angry mothers, we need to pull ourselves into the present and where things might be rough as well as wonderful. That we don't have a safe place to stand in relation to God. But the not safe place is the only place we can actually meet God, where we can actually listen to that voice. I don't know, but I'm going to try that on for size next time I pray this poem to see if that feeling of uneasiness, because frankly, I'm still not happy. But maybe that's good for me. This is the liver that I never wanted to eat. Marjorie?
Maybe it's just an assembly of different modalities so that wherever you stand, whether you're somebody that likes to be chastised or somebody who likes to speak elegant praise poems, you're drawn in. It's multimedia in the old days, which all they had was scents and burning the incense and the sacrifice smell, and they had words, and so they're trying to draw people in whatever way they could.
And also, I was never good at this as a teacher. As you can see, what I'm doing here, this is my happy place as a teacher. But people were always saying, you need to teach in a variety of ways because people learn in a variety of ways. Right? Certainly, if you've got a large spiritual community, people are always coming from different places. People do have different concerns, and people will be activated by different modes of relationship to the divine. And I think Marjorie is absolutely right. I'm not sure about the lack of entertainment issue here, although I'm going to think about that. But I agree. I think that if the Psalms were all one way, one voice, one relationship to God, that it would be hard for different people to find their own way in. It would be kind of spiritual totalitarianism. And that is really not what Judaism is and what it's ever been. In fact, as this psalm reminds us, even at the most intimate moments in our relationship with God, we never just lay back and listen to God's voice. We always had our own opinions. We always pushed back and went our own way. Now, maybe that wasn't a good thing. Maybe that pissed God off, but we were definitely not. It's definitely not a tradition of passive, static submission. It is one of active, dynamic relationship. Adria, I think you get the last word today, and then I'm just going to say something about it.
I was very impressed with your question, or your wondering about why this was put into the service at this point, because what it stressed for me was the multi-layers through time. So there was the writing, or the I don't know, the solidifying of this psalm, which could have come from different voices or different oral moments, who knows? And now I have to read the other psalms and see if they're continuous or they're so disrupted as this. So now I have to do that. And then the layer of why is it put here by the rabbis at this point in the Shabbat service. So lots to think about and muse over. I really appreciated everyone's thoughts. I've taken me to a lot of very different places. Thank you.
Amazing contributions. As we see, it took me the entire session for us to get through one psalm. So clearly, but I'm going to still dream. Next week, my dream is that we will talk about in depth, but maybe not this in depth. Because I feel like you guys really got the mode of reading that I was hoping to teach. And now I feel like we don't have to kind of nail things down quite so much. But I do want us to we'll focus on Psalm 92, which is an extraordinary psalm. It's a psalm of the Sabbath day. It's extremely intimate. There are a lot of shifts of perspective there, and there are problems and discontinuities. And also, we'll at least look a little bit at Lecha Dodi. But I think that Adria's idea of going through the rest of the Psalms, even though we're not going to be able to go through them because of my inefficiency as a teacher together, but reading them through in light of the discussion that we've had and trying to think about them as a sequence, but a sequence of sequences, because each Psalm is a sequence of different voices and positions and relations to God for us to consider. Sam, you kept saying, you read critically. I mean, you didn't say critically, but you said some of the things that are being offered by these texts you accept, and some you don't. Some you identify with and disidentify with. And I would say that's number one. That's great to do that. And number two, I think you can learn a lot by marking the stuff that makes you feel like, yes, now I'm really identifying here, versus, you know what, here, no, this isn't me. I don't want to go here. And then hold that in tension with the fact that for the writer of this, these were all part of the same thing. So it's not all you. You don't want to go to all those places. But what are the places that they're trying to get to that includes all of these different steps? And see how this looks to you from that perspective. And then we'll give the more rigorous treatment to Psalm 92 and think about Shabbat, which we haven't done at all when we talk about Lecha Dodi and that kind of relationship with Shabbat. And somebody mentioned the Shekhinah in the first class, and hopefully we can get our mysticism on. But thank you, an awesome class. And Adria?
In last Tuesday's Dershuni class, Rabbi Felicia asked people what they liked best about Shabbat, and many people said Lecha Dodi, which is me as well. And so I don't want to skimp on Lecha Dodi next week. That's just a thought, really. Maybe start with 92, but I don't know. My heart's with Lecha Dodi. I think Joyce, thank you. Joyce too.
And maybe
just a request.
I'm going to think about this. We do take requests, and our phone lines stay open. So I'm going to think about this. I will think about starting with Lecha Dodi. I've always wanted to talk about Psalm 92 with somebody, and I may never have a chance again, but that's selfish. So, okay, thank you. And thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of the week and a wonderful Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. It was a wonderful class. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you
so much.
so much. Have a great evening, and we'll see you next week.